This is part two of David Widerker's response to Harry Frankfurt's attack on the principle of alternative possibilities. And I'll take a few minutes to review what was going on in part one to set this up. And you can fast forward until we get into the more details in the slides here. The situation is we have the principle of alternative possibility. Frankfurt thinks it's false. Widerker thinks it's true. It's a principle that seems to fit with libertarianism. The principle is that a person's morally responsible for performing a given action only if he could have acted otherwise. And then what we had in part one was a Frankfurt-style example. It was supposed to be a situation in which a person performs an action and they're morally responsible for it, but they could not have done otherwise. And so what Widerker does, we pick up here talking about that Frankfurt-style example that's intended to show that the PAP is false. And in that case, we have Jones, who's considering killing Smith, and Black intervenes. If he doesn't show that he's blushing, which is an indication he's going to decide to kill Smith, Black's going to intervene and make sure that Jones kills Smith. So what Widerker says is that that fails. The problem is there's a dilemma. If that's initial idea that the blushing or whatever signal it is that he's going to kill Smith, if it's causally sufficient, well, you don't have a situation that's going to be convincing to the libertarian. You're already including causal determinism, so that's not going to work. But if it isn't, then Jones still has the ability to do otherwise, and so that fails. So now we consider a potential response. Okay, a defender of Frankfurt might claim that Jones shows an inclination to decide, but that this is a temporal process. This is extended, and this is what leads to the full decision. So as soon as the inclination is there, Black can intervene and stop what's going on. Now, Widerker right away says this isn't going to work, right? This idea of extending out the decision process in time is unconvincing. For one reason, it seems to just push the debate back one step. You know, the idea of, well, when does Black intervene? Does Jones still have an alternative? And you have to consider the details there. And Widerker thinks it's not going to work. You're going to still have that same dilemma. And the other thing is, and this seems one that Widerker is in favor of, that the libertarian might reject the objector's conception of a decision. And Widerker claims, you know, it's possible that decisions are a simple mental action so that they're not extended over time. Now, this may sound a little odd. So someone may say, I'm deciding whether to go. And so that's clearly an extended temporal process. What Widerker means is that, well, when we say that, that's not really the decision. That's the prelude to a decision. That's the weighing the pros and cons, but it still has to lead to a time at which a decision is made. And that is a simple mental action that's not extended over time. So what about, okay, if that's the case and decisions are just not extended, what about actions? And Widerker says Frankfurt does seem to be right in rejecting the PAP when applied to extended actions. So we had the PAP at 4 steps, and so we're adding a 5th step here, a 5th premise, a portion of this Frankfurt-style example, rather. And we have 5C. Had Jones chosen at T2 not to kill Smith at T3, he would have succeeded in doing so. So we're speculating on this possibility, and that would be a necessary condition for what we really want here, step 5 in the FSE. Jones could have acted otherwise, that is, Jones could have performed the act of not killing Smith. Now, in the case where the FSE would deprive Jones of his ability to act otherwise. That is, it would make 5 false, and of course, it would make 5C false as well. But okay, that would work for that action, but it wouldn't count against Jones's ability to decide otherwise. So we have to distinguish between actions and decisions. And Widerker says it's the decisions that we are morally responsible for. And we'll see some alternatives here. Let's look at one. So Widerker says if we were to give up on the PAP of a certain form that we grant is false to the objector, like Frankfurt, we still have these principles. The libertarians still can appeal to these intuitive principles, such as the PAV, the V as part of avoidance. A person is morally responsible for performing a given action A only if one could have avoided performing that action. Now, in the Frankfurt style example, Jones can't at T1 prevent Smith's death, right? No matter what happens, he's either going to do it on his own, decide on his own and kill Smith, or Black's going to intervene and kill Smith. So we grant that. Jones also cannot avoid the property of having killed Smith at T3. Jones is going to be the person to have killed Smith, but he can avoid the performance of his actual action of killing Smith. That action where he decides to kill Smith and does kill Smith. That action then is different from the action of not deciding or deciding not to kill Smith, but then being forced to kill Smith anyway. So what Widerker is doing is he's saying we need a fine-grained account of decisions. If we make it as we've described, if that's how decisions are, and it seems plausible that this is correct, then we have PAV still being true, even in the Frankfurt style example. So Frankfurt fails to show that the PAV is true, and that's an intuitive principle that the libertarian can hold on to. Now, obviously the decision is the key, and Widerker, sorry, I misspelled it there, Widerker focuses on the decision to kill Smith. Now that decision, or the action that includes that decision, right, the extended action in which that decision is a part, is what Jones is responsible for in the proposed case, right? But he would not be responsible for that had Black intervened. Why not? Because he would not have made that decision. That wouldn't be part of that action. It would be a different action. So Jones had the possibility, had the alternative of avoiding it. So even though Jones might be morally responsible in the situation where he decides to kill Smith and does kill Smith, he does have an alternative. He could have avoided that particular action that included his decision to kill Smith. He could have avoided that. And so Widerker says we have some undefeated principles, some principles that are still true. And there are 3 of them that Widerker says, even when carefully considering a Frankfurt style example, it doesn't show that these 3 are false. And so we have another one here. A person's morally responsible for his decision, right? So we'll call this PAP and D for decision, for his decision to do A, only if he could have decided otherwise. And that's not shown false by the Frankfurt style example that we can consider. Now we also have the PAV, the one we've just talked through more carefully. A person is morally responsible for performing a given act A only if he could have avoided performing that action extended over time that included that particular decision that we've talked about. So Widerker says that is still true, even in light of the Frankfurt style example. And then finally, he has another principle, PAV prime, where we have this, where V is a complex act property, that is killing or voting, and T star is the exact time at which a person S Vs intentionally. S is morally responsible for his Ving intentionally at T star, only if it was within his power not to V intentionally at T star. And Widerker says this principle is still true, even given careful consideration of the Frankfurt style example. So Widerker finally makes a small concession at the end. He has these three principles that he thinks, okay, so we'll give up on the PAP as stated, but we have these capture the intuition. This is what the libertarian needs. This still makes sense. You still have to have these alternative possibilities, the ability to decide otherwise, or the ability to act otherwise that includes the decision, or the ability to act otherwise that includes this intentionality aspect to it. So this is a weak victory for Frankfurt. Widerker concedes that the principle of alternative possibilities, if we modify just a little bit, is false. Frankfurt does succeed at showing the PAP prime is false, where A is a complex act, a person is morally responsible for performing A, only if he could have performed some other complex act instead of A. So we're leaving this kind of as a generic complex act, such as killing Smith. He's morally responsible only if he could have done something else instead of killing Smith, more complex generically. But that seems to be false, shown by the Frankfurt style example, but not those three significant principles that Widerker maintains are still true.